There was a phone call Prince Harry made this week that he never wanted anyone to know about, and the silence surrounding it is louder than anything he has ever said publicly. For 6 years, Harry moved like a man who always had options. Like every door he closed led to another one quietly opening somewhere else. California offered freedom, Africa offered purpose, Netflix offered relevance, and the United Kingdom lingered like a safety net he could step back into whenever the timing felt right. But this week, something shifted in a way that feels irreversible. One by one, every single one of those doors didn't just close, they locked. Not because of outside enemies, not because of media pressure, but because of a plan built too carefully, too deliberately, and a palace that finally decided it had seen enough. If you've watched Harry slowly drift away from everything that once defined him, if you felt that subtle but undeniable sense that something was breaking beneath the surface every time he spoke, every time he appeared, then what happened this week explains all of it. In the next few minutes, everything starts to connect. The arrangement that Buckingham Palace quietly refused to sign. The one country Meghan's entire strategy depended on. The message King Charles sent that still hasn't been answered. But before any of that makes sense, you have to understand the plan itself, because the plan is where everything begins to unravel. This wasn't just about a visit. It wasn't even about reconciliation. Reports describe Meghan's vision as something far more calculated, a soft re-entry into the UK. Not as a full working royal, but not as an outsider either. A carefully balanced position where she could attend select charitable events, appear at royal adjacent functions, and benefit from security arrangements that looked and felt indistinguishable from those of active members of the royal family. Not fully in, not fully out. A space in between. A space that only works if the palace agrees to play along. Think about that for a second. For that plan to exist, the palace has to open its doors just enough. It has to lend its credibility, its structure, its silent approval. It has to signal without saying it outright that Meghan is still welcome within the system she once walked away from. And here is where everything becomes dangerously fragile, because the palace does not say no the way ordinary institutions do. There are no dramatic announcements, no official rejections. Instead, there is absence, there is silence, there are missing invitations, unscheduled meetings, unanswered communications that stretch just long enough to become an answer in themselves. Look closely at what that silence actually looks like. No invitation to Sandringham, no defined role in any upcoming royal event, no confirmation of security coordination for public appearances, no shared family photographs, no casual lunch that conveniently becomes a press moment. Each of these things on their own feels insignificant, almost accidental, but together they form something much more deliberate, a pattern, a barrier, a wall that doesn't need to be announced because it is felt. For months, Meghan's team reportedly waited for even the smallest signal that the door might open. Just one, just enough to begin building momentum, but it never came. Not once. And here's the part that changes everything. This silence didn't hit Meghan the hardest. It hit Harry, because Harry understands what that silence means in a way Meghan never could. He grew up inside it. He watched it happen to his mother. He knows the difference between being tolerated and being truly welcomed, between a room that smiles at you and a room that quietly closes behind you. And right now, every room connected to his past is closing in exactly that way. Now step into the real trap, because this is where the situation becomes almost impossible to escape. Harry's life in California was never as independent as it looked. Every major deal, the Netflix partnership, the Archewell Foundation, even the now collapsed Spotify agreement, was built on one unspoken assumption: that the Sussex name would always remain connected, even loosely, to the royal narrative. That connection wasn't just symbolic, it was the entire value of the brand. Strip it away, and what remains is something much smaller, something far less powerful. This is why the palace's silence is so devastating. It doesn't just block a return, it removes the one element that made everything else work. Harry cannot fully go back, but now he cannot fully move forward either. He exists in a space that requires the door to stay slightly open, and the palace has just closed it. But the financial reality is only part of the story. The deeper loss is something far more personal, far more difficult to repair. Because when those doors close, Harry doesn't just lose access to an institution. He loses access to the physical places that hold his mother's memory. Kensington Palace, Sandringham, Windsor. These aren't just buildings, they are fragments of a life that no longer exists. Moments frozen in time that he can only revisit if someone else allows it. And that is the detail that changes everything. A working royal walks into those spaces as part of duty. Harry now stands outside them, waiting for invitations that are no longer coming. Sit with that. Really sit with it. Because this is not just about status. It's about distance. Emotional, physical, irreversible distance. And just when it seems like there might still be a way through, something else closes the system even tighter. The part almost nobody is explaining properly. This is not speculation. This is documented. Harry lost his UK court appeal for state-funded security. Completely, every level rejected. What that means in simple terms is devastating. Without that security, Meghan's plan cannot function. Public appearances require protection. Protection requires approval. And that approval, Ravik has already said no. And this is where the story stops looking like a misunderstanding and starts looking like a complete shutdown of every possible path Harry thought he still had. Because when security disappears, everything else collapses behind it. Without it, there are no controlled appearances, no carefully staged public moments, no quiet re-entry disguised as charity. Without it, Meghan's entire plan doesn't just weaken, it becomes impossible. And Harry knows exactly why that matters more than anyone else. Because he understands what happens when protection changes, when systems fail, when the structure you relied on suddenly isn't there anymore. That memory isn't theoretical for him. It's personal. It's permanent. And in the middle of all of this, there is one figure who could have stepped in quietly, subtly, without headlines, without public statements, and shifted the outcome just enough to keep the door slightly open. One person whose influence still carries weight even now, King Charles. But here's where the story takes a turn that feels almost too heavy to ignore. He didn't intervene, not this time. Reports suggest his treatment continues, that his energy is limited, that every decision now is measured, careful, deliberate, and when it came to this, he chose not to spend what influence he has left fighting for a plan he does not believe in. That's not cruelty. That's not rejection in the way people expect. It's something quieter and, in many ways, harder to accept. It's a father stepping back, not because the bond is gone, but because the battle no longer feels like his to fight. Think about what that feels like. Not anger, not confrontation, just absence. The kind of absence that doesn't announce itself but settles into every unanswered message, every delayed reply, every moment where support used to exist and suddenly doesn't. That's where Harry is right now, not pushed out, but no longer pulled in. And while that silence spreads, there is someone else inside the system who hasn't needed to say a single word for her position to become unmistakably clear. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, has responded to all of this without responding at all. No statements, no reactions, no visible engagement with the chaos unfolding around her. And yet, her presence has never felt stronger. Because while one path tried to re-enter quickly, loudly, visibly, Catherine chose the opposite approach. Years of quiet consistency, careful timing, a return to public duty only when she was physically ready, a focus on projects that build slowly instead of exploding into headlines. It's not dramatic, it's not attention-seeking, but it works. And the palace has made its decision without ever having to announce it. It has chosen stability over disruption, continuity over negotiation. That contrast is where Meghan's plan finally breaks, because the plan depended on navigating around that stability, finding space beside it without directly confronting it. But there is no space left. Not anymore. The system has closed ranks. And then come the numbers. The cold, unarguable numbers that remove any remaining doubt. Meghan's approval ratings in the UK have dropped to their lowest recorded level. That's not opinion. That's data. That's the public speaking in a way the palace cannot ignore. Because the palace doesn't operate on emotion. It operates on survival, on public trust. And when that trust drops below a certain point, decisions get made quickly, quietly, and permanently. This is that moment. Everything that people sensed over the past few years, every hesitation, every shift in tone, every growing distance, it all leads here. Not to a dramatic confrontation, but to a quiet conclusion. A threshold crossed. A decision finalized. And now look at Harry's reality as it stands tonight. A full return as a working royal is no longer possible. The system has made that clear. A complete separation, cutting ties entirely, and building something independent in California also collapses under its own weight because the brand he built depends on the connection he's now losing. Even a middle path, a quieter presence in the UK focused on personal causes, becomes complicated beyond repair because it would require dismantling the very plan that created this situation in the first place. 3 directions, none of them open. He is standing in a space that looks like it should have exits, but every path leads back to the same place. And this is where the story circles back to something deeper, something that that has been there from the beginning, but only now becomes impossible to ignore. Diana stood in a version of this moment once, trapped between roles, expectations, and realities she didn't choose. And when she finally moved, she did it alone. Not with permission, not with approval, but with decision. That is the part of this story nobody can predict, because the only move that changes anything from here doesn't come from the palace. It doesn't come from Meghan. It doesn't come from public opinion. It comes from Harry himself and the choice he has not yet made. And that brings everything back to the beginning, to that phone call he tried to keep hidden. Because the reports say it wasn't made to Meghan. It was made to someone else, someone who represents something different, something separate from the plan that has now collapsed. And whatever was said in that conversation hasn't surfaced yet, but the silence afterward tells its own story.